Okay, then I'll welcome everybody to our penultimate meeting of this unusual school year. It's my pleasure to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations upon whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. And that's certainly where I'm sitting today, feeling like a very grateful settler. It is just bursting with life out there. There's nothing better than Vancouver Island in June, and I am just so grateful. And I invite all of you to consider your relationship to the land and the people who have lived here since time immemorial, and our responsibilities to them, especially in our role in the education system. I want to apologize for our late start, and we'll just jump right into it. Before we move any further, though, I want to share for those who are following along on the live stream, if you want to send in questions via email so that we can answer them when we get to our question period. The email tonight is boardmeeting0525@sd61.bc.ca. So it's boardmeeting0525@sd61.bc.ca. And I'm Jordan Waters, and I'm a board chair. And I think it was a little confusing. The only feedback I got last time, it was just difficult to tell who is who. It's also difficult for us to create a circle here where we can all introduce ourselves. So I thought maybe it would be worthwhile to introduce our trustees so that the public or anybody else joining us is aware of who the voting members of the board are, and so you know who to look for those hands. So I'll just go through the line in the order that I see you on the screen, and perhaps you can just wave or say hi. I'm not sure the best way. We'll just give it a try. Trustee Diane McNally.
Hi.
Trustee Angie Hensa.
Hello.
You guys all look so good tonight. Trustee Ann Whitaker.
Hi there.
Trustee Rob Painter.
Good evening, everyone.
Trustee Nicole Duncan.
Hi, everyone.
Trustee Elaine Leonard.
Good evening.
Trustee Ryan Painter.
Good evening, everyone.
And Trustee Tom Ferris. Okay, and then Superintendent Shelley Green. And our Secretary Treasurer Kim Morris, and those are the key players at the table, although we are nothing without our extensive support staff who are so skilled and are keeping things running here. So without further ado, I would like to ask for approval of the agenda or any additions. Trustee Whitaker? And do we have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Leonard. All those in favor? Any against? No, okay. So the motion carries unanimously, and I'm just going to be going painfully slow like this in order to make sure I don't miss anything. But if I do miss anything, please wave wildly and I'll do my best to catch you. And I know we've got lots of eyes watching, so thank you for your patience as we navigate this. So now I'm looking for approval of the minutes, which are on page 6 from our April 27th meeting, or any changes, concerns. Trustee Leonard and Trustee Ryan Painter, all those in favor? Any against? Okay, that's unanimous. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Trustee Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if we'd actually categorize this as business arising from the minutes, but I just wondered under E question period, well, I'm very glad to see that we've recorded the questions as per our bylaw. I'm wondering if we provided any answers during the last board meeting, and if so, if those could be included in the minutes.
Certainly, we can go back and take a look at that. Yes. Okay. So I think we're moving straight to the chair's report. I wish that I'd put together a piece of paper that showed you all of the various meetings that are happening, but there's weekly meetings essentially with the BCSTA and then also with the ministry. It's providing all sorts of information about the constantly changing and evolving stages of this COVID response in education. And now, of course, the return to school. I just want to recognize all the work that's happening at all the different levels to keep the communication flowing. And so that's been something I'm trying to stay right on top of. And at the same time, it's like a fire hose in terms of the degree of information coming out. But all of the information is being shared out, filtered out publicly, but they're doing a really good job of letting boards see the information first and before very quickly rolling it out publicly. But that's the situation. So in addition to that, I just wanted to just mention all the work that's happening behind the scenes to prepare for graduations. And I'm excited to be able to provide a salutation to all of a short address to all of our graduates. What a year. Grad 2020 is a real challenge for everybody, and so I'm very proud of everybody who's putting everything together to celebrate the amazing accomplishments of our students. So that's it. I don't have any trustee reports on the agenda, although I certainly know that trustees are doing lots of work out there. Trustee Ferris?
Sure, just very quickly, I only just thought of this. Last weekend, I was working in the garden and I heard a noise coming down the street that sounded like somebody was getting married. It turned out that it was my local school community, the Quadra Elementary School community, and they had a long parade. And they came down my street and a few of the others in the neighborhood, and everybody came out to cheer them on. And it was a very heartwarming event. Thank you.
Trustee Painter?
Yeah, just quickly, just riffing off of Trustee Ferris. I was gardening in the front yard last week, and I had two parents in my community come up and tell me how amazing the teachers are, how amazing the school district is, how supportive everyone has been for their kids. They're just so elated. They were gushing. So I just really wanted to provide that feedback and shout out to everybody for all the amazing work we're doing at this really challenging time, especially for those working right in the system.
Indeed. So self-care for everybody when we're in the home stretch here, but I know everybody's working just so hard. So we'll move to the board committee reports. Seeing nobody else. For our Operations, Policy and Planning Committee, it's the only committee meeting that we've had. And the minutes are on page 14. Trustee Leonard, did you have anything to add?
No, minutes are there for everybody to read, and no particular motions came out of it, as it was an update and a budget meeting.
Okay, then I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Chair. Fairly busy time, as you will note. My report is on page 16. I would really like to recognize the amazing work that, number one, the pandemic team has done since the word go on trying to pull in the dilemmas and considerations as a team and think about all the layers that needed to be considered. But I also would like to pay very special attention to our partners who have met with me at least twice a week, every single week since this started, sometimes for hours at a time, and sometimes follow-up pieces as we navigate through some of the difficulty pieces. Everybody has done amazing work. We've all been on the end of their phones. I've bothered poor Winona several times on weekends and evenings as we've navigated through some of the more complicated components that came up. So I commend the amount of energy and effort everybody has put as a team event to try and get through this very challenging time. So that is my report. If you have any other questions, just put it forward to be accepted.
Trustee McNally?
Hi, thanks, Superintendent. I just have a couple of questions. I'm interested in, I think I know, but I'm just interested in what the substance of the professional conversations meeting is. And as always, I'm interested if anything, I know you would let us know if anything comes out of the principals and vice principals meeting in the meetings via Zoom that you had. And last question, I'm not sure, I don't think we have anybody from VCPAC here. Are they able to be at the Zoom table? It would be good to have them here.
Okay, so you were asking about PRC, Professional Relations Committee? Is that the one?
No, it was the professional conversations meeting. It sounds intriguing. I just don't know what it is.
I'm looking for what you're looking at. Oh, I see, under meetings and events, sorry. So we've been working on, as a professional development component, professional conversations. So generative dialogue coaching, we've had that for quite a number of years with working with different principals and vice principals on professional conversations. So it's in line with those components that we've been doing. Sorry, Diane, Trustee McNally, what was your second one?
VCPAC.
Just anything of note coming out of principals and vice principals meetings. I'm sure you've got too much to even list. It's a hectic time for everybody, but just wondering if there's any.
So those are monthly meetings that we always have. Pretty much we've been focused almost 100% on COVID and how to be handling that in schools, as we've shifted direction several times due to the ministry having numerous meetings with our principals and vice principals on what that means. And it can be anything from how to do the health and safety in their schools, to navigating getting everybody out, food systems in there, how to poll their schools for ESW. So all the aspects that we've been doing through COVID as a regular meeting with principals and vice principals to keep them up to speed, also to keep them informed about what the deputy minister is saying.
Thank you. And the last one was VCPAC at the virtual table. I don't think we have anybody from VCPAC here, and I'm wondering if they have the capability and interest because I miss them.
At this point, I've been speaking with the president on a regular basis. Jody prefers it to be a call-in rather than Zoom. So I reach out to her every single Friday, catch her up on what's going on. And if she has any questions that come from parents or advice on what they can and should be doing, that's where I provide it.
Thanks, Superintendent.
If there aren't any more questions, would somebody like to move to accept the report? Thank you, Trustee Painter. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Leonard? All those in favor of accepting the report as presented? Any opposed? So that's unanimous. Superintendent?
So just wanted to bring the board up to speed a little bit on Sundance. As you know, we had prepped and planned to have a portable delivered, getting a playground set up, sharing some space with the CSF on the big school. Everything was absolutely on board to be ready. The registration was up to 18 students in that school, and then COVID hit. And as COVID started to become more clear on a future piece and the expectations even of what we are doing right now with stage 3 and looking at social distancing, sharing spaces and being able to have rotational learning, we got very concerned about what that would look like in the limited space that a portable and outside space would be. And of course, the CSF is not our school district. And so the guidelines for preparing all of our buildings and following the protocols, even though we are provincially asked to be doing them, we would feel an awful lot more comfortable if we were actually the people following through with the area and making sure that all guidelines were followed in any kind of sharing space. With that in mind, we looked to Willows to see if indeed they would have space. if we moved this cohort to Willows, and indeed they do. And so they had a couple of choices that in COVID reality sounds very safe to us, in that we can put the students in there if we're still in rotational learning in September. It's easier to rotate them around if you've got playground space and in-school space to offer the other aspects of learning. We know the space is well cleaned and sanitized on a regular basis, and we have the staff to make sure that that's a consistent piece for these families. And if we remain in rotational learning, we're looking at if all students were coming, it would be less than 9 on a rotational basis. So with that in mind, and knowing we had the space, we talked to the chair and vice chair about the possibility of reaching out to the families to start a consultation with them to see how they felt about COVID and the spacing. We talked to every single family in particular. We talked about the space, even though we are ready and we certainly could be setting it up, how the space has limitations with just this design, that Willows did have space available, that would have the fluidity of the whole entire school in that school community, that indeed they would have a choice if they do want their children to enter into kindergarten this coming year or wait a year, and both would be entirely open to them. If they were to choose to stay in Willows after this year, they have that opportunity. The numbers are going down as we predicted through this boundary review, and that would be open to them. And we would work with the daycare scenario that we certainly already are in a process of. All of the parents except one were absolutely thrilled that, number one, we considered them in this, that we reached out to them and had a good conversation, and they were fully on board. One parent was taken a bit aback, had their mind around where they live and the closeness to the school, but does have in mind as well the need for safety in these unusual times. So all were in agreement, and so we've chosen to move forward in this direction to be able to provide all those things, especially a safe place for this fall. And we'll keep in touch with these families to see if they do want their children to enter into kindergarten this fall or delay it for 1 year. And then they have the choice whether they want to do kindergarten next year or enter into grade 1. It's entirely up to them. But all the families were really pleased that we considered them, especially in these very unusual times.
Hey, any questions? Trustee Painter.
I would just, not to nitpick, but you mentioned one thing that had me curious. The bit about not attending and going into grade 1. I guess I kind of had the understanding that K is now considered to be part of the education system. Are there any directives on that or any issues with the ministry as far as that's concerned?
Nope, the ministry allows every parent to make that choice. Some parents have late bursts in kindergarten, so choose to keep their kids at home for 1 more year. And then they have the choice the following year that they can enter into kindergarten or enter into grade 1.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Learned something new today.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move to the George J. renaming update.
So we just wanted to bring this back to just put it back on everyone's plate. Indeed, we stepped out with every intention to form a committee. Shelley had reached out to the 2 nations to start a conversation about them possibly having a representative sit the committee. It went through the Indigenous ad hoc as a beginning conversation and consultation, really more with the mind that wasn't necessarily George J, but and if we're going to be looking at renaming down the line, what would that look like? What process do we want to be going into? And within the school, Mel had reached out to her PAC and to our school community about people possibly sitting on there. She was collecting information about the people that might be interested and possibly bringing a process if there was a number of people in her school that wanted to be on it, as there is limited in numbers. And then COVID hit. And so everything went on hold. Everyone moved off of this George J naming process and back into dealing with COVID. And we will have assured everybody that the moment that we get a calmer horizon, we'll be bringing it back, but likely not until next fall.
Any questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll move to the next agenda item, which is the standing committee dates.
So on page 17, we have a little diagram for you. As we always bring forward, we've looked at the school calendar for, as we've recommended it, where they would fit in. So we have our normal standing committees, and hopefully you'll accept that motion and put it forward so we can get it on the calendar and plan around it.
Okay, are there, Trustee Whitaker?
I
And then
just put the
Trustee
motion
Henson?
on the floor.
Okay, Trustee Hens, are you seconding?
I have a question. I can second it and then ask.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. Sorry, just looking at for next year for the board meeting, Tuesday, May 25th, which is basically this meeting, the day after Victoria Day. And I remember, I think it was last year, or perhaps even the year before that this came up, and VC PAC coming forward and saying, if possible, not to have our board meetings on that 4th Tuesday, because that's when they have their meeting. So then they can't have somebody attend our board meeting. And if they were consulted or asked about this, and if that's not a good day, if maybe the 3rd Monday of May next year would be better for our board meeting.
So I'm not sure if Nita had reached out to the different partner groups and gone through the calendar. So I'm not sure if she spoke to VC PAC about this particular day. I'm just zipping through the calendar now. I'm not sure if there's another one after that. So May 25th. Yeah, so we run out of days. It becomes June.
Yeah, so would it be possible to do it on the 3rd Monday instead of the 4th Tuesday?
So we'd have to go the 3rd, 10th, and 18th.
Which
in
I'm
May.
not particularly for one way or the other. I just thought, just curious if VC PAC had been asked, because I know that it was a conversation that we had with Mark Walsh back when he was Secretary Treasurer about them not, that day not working for them in the past. So just something to put a bug in someone's ear if they need to be checked in with.
We could always go to the 31st, which is the last Monday in May, rather than a Tuesday. So in that May, we've got the 3rd, 10th, you'd have 2 weeks off rather than 1, and it would be the 31st.
Trustee Whitaker?
Thank you.
Hello?
Oh, there's Jody. Maybe she wants to answer this. I would just say that my understanding was that this had to do with their AGM and their elections. And I think that we actually last year dropped, or whenever it was, we dropped a boundary review on them at the same time meeting at the same time as their AGM without enough notice for them to change. So I think that as long as they're given a year's notice, they can probably adjust their awards ceremony. But I think I do hear Jody on the line, and maybe she can answer that.
Jody, please
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, sure. The way that you're doing it this year has worked really well for us, holding it on the following Monday as opposed to the Tuesday after the long weekend. So that would be the preference, but again, as was mentioned, given enough notice, I think we could probably try and find an alternate day for that particular event.
Okay, given that we're tasked with approving this right now, is there any reason why we wouldn't just move it to the Monday?
And the only preference,
if we were to do that on the 31st, that would work for us.
We're often very busy, so I don't see adding the extra time doesn't seem like a bad thing to me. Superintendent?
So the choices you would have is an intense May 3rd, 10th, and 17th, or an intense June 31st, 7th, 14th, 21st. I would go for the former, the 17th, because June is crazy with all the grads and everything else. So my recommendation would be, if you want to move it out of the 25th, to move it back to the 17th.
Yeah, that would work for us.
Okay, would somebody like to amend? We need to amend it to move it to the 17th, is that correct?
Yes.
Trustee Hensa?
Yep, I'll move that amendment to change it to Monday, May 17th.
And a second, Trustee Painter. Excellent problem solving. And thank you for bringing that up, Trustee Hensa. All those in favor? Okay, and that passes. So we move to the specialty academy fees.
And I would like to pass this over to Colin Robertson. He can bring you up to speed on academy fees.
On page 18 of your pack-up, you'll see a memo stating that the 4 high schools which run specialty academies have had their fee structures proposed for the coming 2020-21 school year approved by their parent advisory councils. And on the subsequent 4 pages, you'll see the letters from each of the Esquimalt High, Lambert Park, Reynolds, and Spectrum. And so we're asking that the board consider and approve the motion that these fees be made public and posted on a district website.
Trustee Whitaker?
Moving that.
Just before we rush ahead to move it, I just want to make sure our partners have an opportunity to chime in. Does anybody have anything they want to? Okay, then I've got Trustee Whitaker moving it and Trustee Painter seconding. Any speakers to the motion?
I would just thank Colin for his work on this, and as well as the working in partnership with the parent advisory councils to come up with these fees and the schedules.
Trustee McNally.
Thank you. I'm going to abstain from voting because it continues to really bother me that we have a fee-based program in public education.
Trustee Duncan?
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question. I noticed that in each of the policies that set out the fees and set out the criteria under the School Act for consultation and so on, that we also raise our policy 6159 around financial hardship. And I'm wondering if staff could give us an overview of how we go about ensuring that we communicate that process and how we offer confidentiality should, for instance, families not wish it to be known that there is a situation of financial hardship, but they do have a student that wants to participate. So really around process and how we allow people to access that.
Superintendent?
Colin, do you want to pick that up?
Absolutely, thank you. At the schools where academies are offered, students have the option of talking to any staff member at the school they choose if they are interested in participating in an academy and lack the financial means to do so. And the same would apply to those grade 8 students at middle school who are looking to move to a high school and would be hoping to move into academy. So as through our district website and all of the communications which are sent out by those 4 high schools, inviting students to participate in the academy, make that known and public to those that might be interested. And with certainly a number of the academies, because of the sponsorship support they have from patrons and previous participants in the program, that provides an avenue sometimes to cover those fees on behalf of the students. So at each individual school that's involved, that each school makes a maximum effort to make sure that students know that if they're wanting to be part of that academy, that they have the ability to do so.
Trustee Painter, did you have a question or comment?
No, sorry,
I keep trying to find the unmute the microphone on my window as opposed to down in the corner. It's a tangential question, and I'm not expecting an answer right now. But one of the things that just struck me is that I know of a middle school that has I think a marine-oriented program that I believe fees are associated with that students are able to participate in. I don't really think it fits our qualification of an academy in the way that some of our sports-oriented academies would be. But I am curious about whether or not we have a mechanism in place for doing a review of the fees that are charged and just ensuring that everything is consistent with all the necessary ministry policies, et cetera.
Colin, do you want to follow up with that as well?
I am not aware of a fee structure associated with any of our middle schools for a specialty program. I certainly am aware that many individual schools may charge a fee for an individual limited activity and offer to those students and those families the same ability to participate in a program if there is financial hardship as the high school specialty programs would, so that no student is excluded from any activity of any type. I'm not aware of a specific annual year-long program offered at middle school where there is a fee associated, but I'm certainly happy to do some further research on that and make sure that my assumptions in working with the high schools on their fee structures applies to middle schools also.
And if I could just follow up, Chair.
Sure.
First off, I do apologize for dropping that in your lap. I sincerely wasn't looking for a response right now. I'm happy to follow up with you offline just to give you a few more details and allow you to investigate. And I'm just wondering how the program, as I understand it, fits within our policy structure. That's all.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Oh, sorry, Secretary Treasurer?
I have something after you vote, sorry.
Okay. All those in favor? Any against? Abstentions? Okay, Trustee McNally is abstaining and the rest were voted in favor, so the motion passes. Secretary Treasurer?
Yeah, I think on the previous motion around the meeting dates, you voted on the amendment, but you did not vote on the main motion. So if you could take a vote on that, that would be great.
Oh,
yeah.
My apologies. Let's vote on that. So we're approving the motion as amended. So with that May date changed, all those in favor? Okay, and that is unanimous.
And can we ask one more favor? Where'd she go? Could you just say Ryan Painter or Rob Painter when you're calling out? Would you mind, just for the record?
Yes, yes, I can. I just figure they can see me looking in their eyes.
It's always Ryan. He's a troublemaker.
It's true. It's true.
Okay, trustee questions for the superintendent. It's our troublemaker, Trusty Rob Painter. Oh, just kidding.
I like the French term, unmurder. And I've had the opportunity to think up these questions. I don't think you're going to have answers for me, but just to throw them out there. Early on in the process, it was mentioned that some of the internet service providers had indicated a willingness to provide internet access for some of our families, our students who didn't have access. And I was wondering, do we have any idea on sort of how many students or families were able to participate in that opportunity?
I don't have a total. I can certainly ask Andy to put that together. He was the one working with that and with families. I know there was some sensitivity around some of our families and what they wanted or didn't, but the offer was out there. Andy, do you have an idea of any totals?
Hi, thank you. This was a direct connection between the families and the internet service providers. So I'm not sure, once we passed on the details of the programs, I'm not sure we had any further participation.
May I?
Yes, of course, please.
Okay, thank you. One of the things I've been wondering about so far, I know that we've mentioned on a couple of occasions a number of students of essential service workers who have been into our schools. One of the ones I was wondering about is students with designations. I understood that, well, it was announced provincially, so I guess that meant us too, that there was an opportunity for students with designations to be attending school in person. And I was just curious what the uptake within the district was on that.
So we've had a couple of combinations come together. Some of our children of essential service workers also could be a child who has a designation. And so some of those little ones or older ones have come into schools. Also, they could be a combination of some of our essential service workers designations and are vulnerable. And so planning around that, if there are specific needs of those children, we've been working one-to-one with the whole team around them on what they needed and getting that in place. But all of these can overlap and have done in many of our spaces. So I don't exactly have a number off the top of my head for you, but the uptake has actually been pretty positive.
Okay, thank you for that. And this is one more to put my whole mind at ease rather than anything else. So it's simply following up on what I'm seeing on social media. There's been concerns expressed that some teachers filing for accommodations because they're concerned they're immunocompromised or they're otherwise vulnerable, and they have concerns about going back in the classrooms, that there have been issues. Apparently the College of Physicians is even weighing in on this at some level. And I was just wondering, do we have any sense within our own district of whether accommodations are being granted and sort of what that whole picture is looking like right now?
So the picture is relatively complicated, I'm sure you can imagine.
Absolutely.
And it's complicated by the fact that we're trying to all navigate around what rotational learning looks like, what the 20% looks like, how many people want to be involved with that, how many kids in the school, and keeping the site safe. But on the surface, of course, we're always going to have members and staff who may have immune compromised scenarios, health themselves. And so from the word go, with Winona's support and GVTA, we've asked, and CUPE, for people to let us know. And where we can provide accommodations, we've done it already since all of this started. So people that maybe couldn't go into their workforce and do the things they originally were doing, but could do other pieces, and we can accommodate them in that scenario. We've been doing that. Right now, we've got teams of teachers working very closely together to figure out, especially how to do the rotational learning. And so Rob, you and I, and maybe Elaine would be looking at, we're all grade 5 teachers in our school, and we've got this many, half of our kids coming back in on a rotational piece. And perhaps as a team, we work on who's going to be doing the face-to-face and scheduling those components, who will pick up more than their fair share of the online learning. And can that also be entwined with an accommodation? Absolutely. And so they're complicated. And I know Winona will be nodding, saying we've been trying to work through these one at a time, not the easiest piece, but we're trying as best we can to navigate around those pieces. And for some of our folks, it's one person at a time to realize where they're at and what we're going to do, but it's not an easy, quick, instant answer by any means.
No, and I do appreciate I can't even imagine just how many complications or complicating factors there would be on this one. I guess I want to feel comfortable, and I do, but just to hear it that we are being open to accommodations, and that when someone asks me, I can say that the district is being reasonable in its accommodations and actually taking the concerns of teachers at face value.
We're certainly working on it.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any other questions? Trustee Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I wanted to say thank you very much to Chuck Morris and the team for getting us the latest lead testing results, so the water testing results. And I wanted to follow up to find out where on the website folks can find those results and what our communication plan is in relation to the latest results. Communication in terms of our stakeholder groups.
Kim? I'm not sure if Chuck is on there.
Sure. So I'll start off. I think Lisa probably has some comment to add as well. As far as I know, the results were shared with principals and vice principals and encouraged to share those with parents as far as I know. And I can certainly, I think I sent trustees, I thought I sent out the link where the results were posted, but I can resend that if you like. And Lisa, I don't know if you had anything to follow up with.
That it was sent in a briefing of the link to trustees, and it's under our district tab under reports, and you will see it there, the lead testing results. Nicole.
Thanks so much, Lisa. So the briefing note is on under reports as well, or did it go out?
No, it was sent to trustees. I can look through my email and re-forward it to you.
That's okay. I've got that. I was just wondering whether or not that was communicated out beyond the board, and if so, what that communication looked like.
Okay. I will confirm what Kim expressed earlier, and that it's under reports under the our district tab.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move to the Secretary Treasurer's report.
Okay, my report is attached to the agenda. Obviously under COVID, far less meetings than usual. I would like to highlight that after putting out our third survey for ESW care at all tiers, not including vulnerable, we have placed an additional 1,100 students into each elementary and middle school and into some secondary schools, depending on the parents' understanding of the care they needed. So it's a good news story for us, I think. And principals have really worked hard to take that on. In terms of the volume, I wasn't able to place them myself. And so principals took on contacting all the families on their list. And a number of them are employees as well. So it's a great news story, and a big thank you to principals and vice principals for taking that on.
Okay, would somebody like to move that we accept the report? Thank you, Trustee Ferris. Trustee Whitaker, any comments or questions? Trustee Painter, Rob Painter.
Yeah. Apparently I am the troublemaker. Sorry, Secretary Treasurer, could you just give us the totals then? 1,100 students now, up to a total of how many?
Yeah, so the total that we have for ESW workers is 1,203. And that includes 118 that we had placed in Tier 1. So we've added 1,085 new students to the ESW mix.
Okay, all those in favor of accepting the report? Trustee McNally? That's unanimous. So we'll move to E2B, which is the annual budget.
Okay, so Andy, are you going to show this or am I?
That's very Kim. Whatever's easiest for yourself to go through. You should have screen share capability, but I'm happy to
okay.
step through as well. I've got it open if it's easier for me.
I can do that. Okay, can everyone see the screen or the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So thank you for hanging in there through this weird budget process with us through Zoom. Tonight, I'll be going through some of the consultation, some of the feedback from GVT and CUPE, some of the changes from the last draft, and then rolling up to requesting the board to pass 3 readings of the budget bylaw tonight. As always, we want to check in with our alignment when we're passing our annual budget. Student learning aligned with goals, input and consultation are meaningful, decisions are sustainable. Our process to date, thankfully, we're on the last box of our journey together, and hoping next year we can have a more face-to-face process, but I appreciate everybody's cooperation in this context, so thank you for that. I want to start off by talking about the consultation that we did in February and some of the things we heard and some of the things that are included in this budget that we can do to hopefully address some of the things we heard. So at the Student Symposium, we had 4 topics. Under student voice, we heard about increased opportunities to tell the board what we want and opportunities to share with each other. When students talked about transitions, they felt middle to secondary was a good transition, but that there could be improvement at elementary to middle. And one of the comments was to care about feelings and not opinions. And so I think that speaks to some of the mental health or anxiety about going from those big transitions. Under reconciliation, we heard from students about hands-on experiences, that their education around reconciliation be relevant and contemporary. They wanted to move on from the repetition and come together across the system to discuss topics. They felt they understood the past and wanted to walk together into the future. So where do we go from here and how do we problem solve from here? Climate, there was a lot of talk about recycling, local food, and capital projects around heating and things like that. So in terms of this budget, what can we do? In terms of student voice, we had already been on the path to create more forums. Unfortunately, the diversity and inclusion forum had to be canceled due to COVID, but that was a move already in the direction we wanted to go. We feel we can do these things from our existing budget, and so we'd be looking to do more of these forums or symposiums for students to come together to talk about issues that impact them. We'd like to try to integrate student voice at all levels, like creating space at a staff meeting. That was some of the brainstorming that was going on at Student Symposium. And there's no budget required for that, to have a conversation with students at all levels of our organization. And we can continue with the student representatives at the board and committee levels. And I see we have a student online tonight, so welcome, Naren. Transitions, we will continue to do the good work at middle to secondary because that seems to be working. We'll try to incorporate some middle to secondary transition strategies to the elementary to middle and support with funding if we need to. But we see that as something we can improve, and we'll focus some attention on that. Mental health supports. So existing budget supplemented by the Equity of Opportunity Grant, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in this presentation. In terms of reconciliation through the INED team, student voice and youth forums to connect the community using existing budgets, a move to land-based education, again within the budget in INED, knowledge to knowing by developing a process to access funding to support strategies and intentions. So this is a repurposed budget where schools can apply for a budget and be intentional about how they want to spend it to support strategies to support INED students. And also in the budget this year in INED, a position or positions were created to support some of these reconciliation or INED items. In terms of climate, shifting our understanding from recycling, what do we do at the end of the consumption cycle, or versus upstream, what do we do at the start of our consumption cycle? Expanded gardens and bike racks are something that are already being undertaken and will continue. And we're really turning our mind to preparing capital plans for new instruction or renovation of non-heritage buildings with net zero principles of design and budgeting. And this can use existing funding and also to plan and property disposal to fund. So we've got our mind turned there, definitely as we look to Cedar Hill and Shoreline, how to make actual net zero buildings. And the district has received a $50,000 grant from BC Hydro and has taken the remainder of a salary for an energy manager from annual facilities grants. So this person will be able to identify sort of low-hanging fruit for the district in terms of climate and help us with some of our capital planning around how to address climate in School District 61. Thought exchange. What we heard were some top themes: education assistance support, class size composition, inclusion, social and mental health supports, classroom and school resources, funding, and staff training and Pro-D. When it comes to education assistance support, we see a professional learning series in the Equity of Opportunity Grant spending plan of $100,000 and support for K-3, which may or may not equate to additional education assistant time in those primary classrooms. And that's $300,000. And you'll see that later in the spending plan for Equity of Opportunity Grant. And so as we start to gather feedback from principals, from education assistants themselves, we start to ask, do we need more people or do we need more training? And so I think we're really turning our mind to building that human resource to provide better service to students. And that's been a common theme in the feedback I've heard throughout my time here so far. Class size composition, we have to remind ourselves that the restored language added 164 teachers to the mix, to our staffing component 3 years ago now. We know our PTRs range from 13 to 1 at Craigflower to our highest at Willows at 19.1. And we know the medians for elementary, middle, and secondary are 17.1, 16.6, and 17.9. So those are healthy PTRs. That's something new for us to understand this year. And so as we move into 21-22, we can start to examine that a little more closely, but they're by no means high. In terms of inclusion, we know we've got a big survey that came back, and that report is being built, and that will inform how we move forward with inclusion, as well as the initiatives that were presented at the department meeting a couple of weeks ago. Social and mental health supports. These are already things that we want to do in the upcoming budget year. And again, these are from the department reports a couple of weeks ago. Classroom and school resources. I've been talking about, and we are committed to bringing a group of people together in the fall to talk about school allocations, to make sure we're looking through that lens of equity and to make sure that our allocations are current and relevant to today's context and not based in history 2 decades or 3 decades ago and have remained status quo. funding, there's always a question about the district or school based staffing, and we can discuss that in the upcoming budget years as we reallocate according to need and alignment with the strategic plan. And in terms of funding, we also are going to be prepping for phase 2 of the funding model review. In terms of staff training and Pro D, the training and skills of staff will be attended to through existing budget and equity of opportunity grant. And again, in Thought Exchange, there was some talk about continuity of staff. And so how do we keep good people where they need to be, or do we want to share out the good people and move them along sooner than some people would like? And this was specifically around principals. And service to students cater to individual need. And so how do we really differentiate instruction and make sure we're meeting the needs of those IEPs and things like that? So this is where we think we could attend to some staff training and Pro D. At talking tables, we heard about reconciliation again. Some of the concerns were resources and training overwhelmingly. A community connection. How do we connect to our elders? How do we connect to the land? How do we connect to our nations? And obviously graduation came up quite a lot in the talking tables report as well. In terms of climate, we want to understand they wanted to understand the issue and ideate solutions. And it really came about that recycling isn't the answer to climate or to carbon. And so how do we shift some of that understanding? How do we partner with our municipalities and other organizations? And do we have a common framework for climate in the school district? In terms of student support, collaboration, teaming, family of schools, EAs and teachers came up. Data came up in the discussions at talking tables. Needs-based patterns of staffing in terms of absence to show engagement or burnout. Student attendance, assessment, things like that. Training and in-service came up. Early learning came up in terms of student supports. Under facilities, concerns that we heard about at talking tables were limited space, staffing at facilities and the response time, fair and equitable investment. Why do we walk into some schools and feel a certain way and we walk into others and feel a different way? And refresh cycles. Should we be accelerating our painting refresh cycle, washrooms? And we definitely talked about furniture and equipment. So what can we do in terms of some of these items? Under reconciliation, we've taken the initiative straight from the INED slide a couple of weeks ago in departments. In climate, we again are going to try to shift the understanding of recycling to upstream, and some of the initiatives we spoke about under student symposium fit well here. Under facilities, we are trying to expand our space. We know we're growing, we know we're tight with learning studios, outdoor classrooms, and a boundary review to balance enrollment and capacity. Status quo staffing exists. And as we move into more data-driven decisions aligned with the strategic plan next year, are we in line with where we should be for the square footage and the condition of buildings that we have? We need to take a look at that. An equity of service and a service model analysis and standards. So we speak about this specifically around custodial and things like that. And again, those refresh cycles. In terms of student supports, I've taken the initiative straight from the district team or learning teams slides last week. And I think when we look at the number of initiatives that our team wants to take on and push out in the 2021 school year and are committed to reporting out about throughout the year when we are sitting here again next year and talking about what did we accomplish and where do we need to invest or reinvest and how did this align to the strategic plan. I think there's a plethora of initiatives here that are going to be attending to student support. So I'm really encouraged by that. I'll just let you read them. We received 2 written submissions or presentations in regard to the budget. The first was GVTA, and what we heard was avoid cuts to direct student support. We heard about facilities, inclusion, professional development, in-service and training, recruitment and retention. So avoid cuts to direct student support. So we want to remind that in this budget, the only reduction to student support is the ISP teacher FTE due to the loss of 483 students. And we know that staffing adjustments are common in budgeting when enrollments go up or down. And the 33 FTE reduction is reduced to an overall 12 FTE reduction with retirements, resignations, and postings. So beyond losing 400 students in ISP, we really tried not to, or we didn't, impact direct service to students. And also under this topic was district level administrative staffing. And of course, that's a rollover budget. This can be reviewed for alignment along with every other budget line when the strategic plan is approved to make sure that we are in alignment with those operational plans and goals of the strategic plan. In terms of facilities, safe, hygienic, and effective for learning and teaching. So in terms of safe and hygienic, operations wants to undertake a custodial training program to standardize cleaning expectations, revitalize budgeting to identify cost savings, and improve communication around cleaning. We know we have a rollover custodial budget and we have major safety protocols in place for COVID. So we feel that the buildings are safe and hygienic to move forward. We know the board is actively working to refresh space with a robust annual 5-year capital plan. And that happens every year. And we're really working hard to try to create new space in the district and add capacity where we can. We underwent a boundary review to balance enrollments. Chuck has got in mind to improve supports to school shop programs. So again, those learning and working environments. Preventative maintenance solutions to better support capital planning and reduce operational costs. Revise the work order system. And I will acknowledge, and we do as a team, that the COVID space requirements continue to be a challenge and that it's new and that we're learning through that together. We don't necessarily know what that looks like. We're going to get a good taste of it next week and through June and as we move into September. One of the other mentions was decreased SBIL funding in schools. So here's where we have to remind ourselves just, kind of the steps we go through in terms of allocating SBIL dollars. So first, in our projections for 2021, there are 26 less students to service. And so that results in a loss of funding, which means less SBIL dollars moving out of the door. And the cycle of SBIL in our district is that in April, when we approve the budget, we allocate the SBIL based on projected students. In September, we know we have a data collection process and that determines the actual student count and will increase or decrease our revenue based on how close we were to our projection. Once we have the actual number of students, supports are increased or decreased based on actual, not projected enrollment. So that's kind of the cycle. October to June, we start to distribute our contingency based on emerging need. So perhaps an assessment is completed or an existing student need has emerged, or a new need where a new student has moved into the district and we have to provide supports to them. So I just want to remind everyone that between October and May of this year, $1.1 million was added to the inclusion budget. So we can see how monies roll out throughout the year as needs emerge. Funding at the preliminary budget is always less than the previous year because not all of the funding's been allocated. For example, we hold a contingency. And funding is allocated based on the number of level 1, 2, 3 students in each school and provided to those schools less the contingency in springtime. So just to give you a sense of where we're at this year compared to last year and how we attend to SBIL allocation in School District 61. Professional development, currently in the budget right now, we have a board contribution to contractual joint prody of $109,000. We have a supplement from the education plan of $50,000. We have equity of opportunity grants allocation of $100,000, and we have an ongoing contribution to Tapestry of $5,000. And so we're actually increasing the budget for Pro-D this year for GVTA. In service. So just to give the board an idea, during the 1920 school year, planned events included, now mind you, some of these were May and were not able to carry on, and some of them were February that one or two of them could not be carried out. So we had 37 separate offerings, and this was just a quick calculation from the district team. By no means an in-depth analysis, and this is something we want to turn our mind to perhaps. So 37 separate offerings with 2,020 seats in all 37 of those offerings. So we are offering a lot of in-service to our staff. And so are we intentional about that? Are we tracking who's attending, who might still need to attend? Do we need to increase that? But it gives you an idea of the type of offerings that we are providing within our existing budgets. And 2021 should be no different, except if we can't gather, we may have to be more creative about how we provide those events. From CUPE, what we heard was around clerical, the allocation, the workload, equity, and replacement. In terms of allocation, what we want to do in 2021 and included here is to complete conclude the data analysis that clerical employees began. We'd like to benchmark other districts to see if our staffing allocation is similar or if it's greater or less than other districts to brainstorm, and to update our SD61 allocation model in terms of clerical staffing. Workload. We are going to be, finance is going to be offering a summer startup session for clerical so that there's a good heads up about what's expected over the coming year, and a general get together about how we can be more streamlined. We'll gather key stakeholders, obviously clerical staff and principals, vice principals, review day-to-day responsibilities, review district processes to streamline work in the field. We know that between HR and finance and other departments in the district, we ask a lot of our schools. And so are we being as efficient with them as we can, or are we just making more work for them? So how do we streamline our work so that the work in the field is easier? And we want to work smarter with our integrated power school modules, finance, HR, payroll, and accounts. We know we have some work to do on the technology side to try to make workload easier in schools. Equity, again, will conclude that data analysis that clerical employees began. And just like we do with our schools, with our teaching staff or education assistants or youth and family workers, we want to understand the nuances and uniqueness of each school and how PBP allocate clerical hours to meet the needs of each school, because it's at their discretion. And so we want to understand what they're considering when they're allocating those hours. And replacement. So clerical is the only classification, I think, besides trades perhaps, that are not replaced on an ongoing basis. So we replace our education assistants, we replace our custodians if they're away, we replace our teachers if they're away. So we're committed to analyzing absence data for clerical staff and determining a starting place for a cost of a replacement budget. If we're able to, at the end of the year with surplus, we would like to modify the 2021 budget to bring that into the fold. And if not, we would build it into the 21-22 budget for equity with other QP 947 classifications for the board's consideration and part of its budget process. So I hope that gives you a sense of what consultation the board went through in its budget process and what stakeholder feedback you received and how we are trying to address some of the things that were brought forward and how you can understand what's in the budget now that may attend to some of those things that came forward. And this is starting to build on sort of that goal setting piece and those initiatives that we want to take on to see if they make a difference. And so this is a starting point for us. And we look forward to addressing those initiatives and bringing forward some good news in a year. In terms of the financials, what the ministry template provided is draft 4 of the budget, and I'll just walk you through what changed from draft 3. So the labor settlement funds were announced. As you'll recall, this was about a $3 million amount we thought we would have to take out of our surplus this year and then be repaid by the ministry later. So that fund was announced at 5.65 million. It was a little higher than we thought, which is great. We're cautiously optimistic that we've conservatively budgeted for the collective agreement increases, and that this truly is a little windfall for the district. Support staff benefits grant was confirmed at 90,000. This was something that was also available last year, but hadn't been announced until now. And then again, that 50,000 that we're receiving from BC Hydro for the Energy Manager Grant Agreement. So a total increase to revenue of 5.79 million. And in terms of our surplus, so draft 3 to draft 4, the changes were that, again, that surplus for labor settlement is not required. So we're not required to put up our own money of 3.3 that we thought in draft 3. We have received the announcement on that. And the labor settlement funding was greater than our estimated expenditure by 1.8 million. So that goes directly into the revenue, requiring less surplus to be used. So the decrease in surplus required overall from draft 3 to 4 is 5.1 million. So from draft 3 to 4, the net change in revenue, we have a revenue increase of 5.79 million. And we have a surplus decrease that we have of 5.1 million. So our total increase in overall revenue is 0.7 million from the draft 3 to draft 4. In terms of teacher staffing, just to lay out one more time how we kind of went from the international student program decrease of 33.571 FTE. So as a result of those 483 students leaving. When the SBIL allocations came back from principals, you recall at the May 4th meeting, the staffing pack-ups had gone out to principals, but we didn't know the result. And we knew that the numbers would change between EAs and teachers. And so the pack-ups have come back and principals have increased teacher staffing by 2.22 FTE. George J, we increased admin time for the VP at that school, given the uniqueness of that school. And so we have to backfill that admin time with a teacher, so that it adds a 0.2. And the Indigenous Education Department decided that they would fund another block of a teacher for 0.143 out of their targeted funding. So that brought our total decrease to 31 FTE overall for teacher staffing in School District 61. And then that was further offset by retirements, resignations, and postings of about 19 FTE, leaving a net impact in the district of a 12 teacher FTE reduction from the previous year. In terms of education assistant staffing, again, when those SBIL pack-ups came back, principals had reallocated some of the SBIL dollars to teachers, and so there was a reduction in the education assistants. We know that there's a enrollment projection decrease, and so that's a loss of funding for 420,000, which I've mentioned before. And we know that between October and May, that we don't have those contingency monies out in the district yet. And so the net impact right now is that the SBIL, or the education assistant staffing, looks about 1.1 million short. But we have to remember that between October and May this year, we did add SBIL allocations once September and subsequent needs were identified. So it always looks like less in the preliminary budget than it does in the amended budget from the previous year, because not all of the funding has gone out. What is the contingency we're holding right now at the district level for SBIL? We're holding 329,000 for EAs, and also into the EA budget, we have put some money from the labor settlement. So we can attend to more needs in the fall if necessary. So another little cushion of 433,000 there. So you can start to see with the contingency of 762,000, if we did add another 1.1 million between October 2020 and June 2021, we wouldn't be that far off from being able to add those supports back if they were necessary. So where we saw that decrease in level 1, 2, 3 funding, we may be able to supplement if need arises in the fall. Services and supplies are fairly status quo, except for the addition of the 1.1 Equity of Opportunity grant. This still sits in services and supplies because we haven't quite nailed down the type of staffing. But this is the spending plan that has been worked on by the district team and brought to the senior leadership team. And so, Deb, I'm not sure if you want to speak to this slide or not in terms of our spending plan.
Sure, I'll just speak briefly to it. So as you can see there, what we've done is we've looked at the allocation that we've been provided, the 1.1. We've looked at and listened to the thought exchange, student symposium, inclusion survey, talking tables, various methods of input from stakeholders and partners. And we've allocated the 100,000 for professional learning to the GVTA. A learning series which would have in the past come from the Ed Plan supplemental funds, which were reduced as a result of this Equity of Opportunity supplemental grant. And that is for all professional learning that we provide for teachers K through 12. We've also, we will continue with our physical literacy series for K through 8. Mental health or teenmentalhealth.org work that we're doing with our K through 8, and snapshots will continue. We offer, as you've heard in the past, the counselor collaboration time. So those are existing supports that we have done over the years. We're looking at adding in a trauma-informed practice mostly for elementary into middle. We also have heard very clearly that transition into K and through the primary years is more challenging, particularly in unanticipated student needs. So we're adding 300,000 or allocating 300,000 for that. Again, aligning with supporting for children and youth in care, children receiving non-clinical mental health supports, and also low-income families. So quite likely that will start in just a few of our families of schools. We also have, we have done the EA Bridge program. We're looking at expanding that into a professional learning series for EAs. We have allocated some money for what we're calling CAPE, which is a Center for Assessment and Programming Excellence. And that would be run out of Victor, and what that would allow for, facilitate for, is students who are requiring some additional supports. They would not leave their neighborhood school, but they may come into Victor for some specialized programming and then bridge back into their neighborhood school, and that would be primarily for grades 5 through 8. We had a couple of students try that this year, and it was very successful for them. And then also aligning with the advocacy committee's request of funding the middle years of the MDI, the Middle Years Development Instrument. So that would be fully funded through this fund with some money remaining to be allocated.
Great. Thanks, Deb. Services, carrying on with services and supplies, they're status quo, except that we are throughout the discussion starting from April 27th, it became apparent to me that there's sort of an extra step here in this district of transferring money to local capital and then waiting for a while to spend it and then making these one-time purchases or saving up. And so we started to talk about in Technology for Learning, why don't we just start the refresh cycle now and get the technology in the hands of students and staff? And so that allows us to do that starting 2020, 2021, and reduces that extra step or eliminates that extra step of transferring to local capital. The board also transfers on an ongoing basis a childcare reserve of $100,000 to upgrade the current childcare spaces that we have in the district, and these are separate from MCFD. And so in looking at that a little bit, the finance team discovered that repairs and maintenance to existing space should not really be a capital expenditure, but should fall under operating. So we would definitely like to eliminate this transfer to local capital. We don't think the expenditures meet the criteria of a capital expenditure. And so what this really does is makes line items an annual expenditure and a cost of doing business rather than saving for a rainy day. And just shows up as a continual line item in the district. In fact, we'd like to work on increasing the technology 539. Services and supplies is status quo again, except for we did add some of that extra labor settlement funding back to departments. Departments like continuing ed, English language learner, careers, etc., are funded to a certain extent within the operating budget. And when the wages increased on the wages and benefits side, we reduced the supplies to these departments. And so this is adding back some funds to those departments since we have had the announcement about the labor settlement. Surplus and reserves. On April 27th, I talked about draft 3, an estimated reserve of 13.412 that we needed to save for by the end of the year. And we have been able to eliminate the BCTF GVTA collective agreement increase. So because we've had that announcement, we no longer have to commit our own 3.285 money to that. And because the funding was greater than we had anticipated, it also reduced the amount that we needed to budget in the future year's budget. So it's a good news story for us. The amount that we are going to be spending out of surplus, we hope, is 8.3 million. There are a couple of charts here to show just some tie-in to the schedule. I know that I've presented the 2021 preliminary budget up against the 1920 amended budget, and that's not something that this district does, but I'd like to move forward with. And so I wanted to offer up the, in this column here, the second from right, just a 2021 prelim to a 1920 prelim, which is actually what's reflected in the budget ministry template. And so you can see the tuition has gone down and other revenue has gone down because we budget that as we get it. We don't budget it up front. And then the only other thing I'll point out is down near the bottom, you can see an increase in capital assets purchased from operating and a total reduction in the transfer to local capital. Again, moving on with just a comparison that you can line up to Schedule 2C. Nothing really exciting to note here. In this second to right column, when we compare prelim to prelim, the only item there that really stands out is the international, the reduction in spending in international. We know why that is. Special purpose funds are status quo. However, we do want to keep an eye on our carry forwards, especially the ministry targeted funds, Strong Start, Ready, Set, Learn, and Community Link. And we can see these here, just making sure that we're spending the money that the ministry gives us each year on the things they give us, give it to us for. And I will make a note that Community Link's done a great job in moving from a $518,000 carry forward down to a $264,000. Ideally, we'd like to see 0 carry forwards in our special purpose funds. Capital, we're expecting less bylaw revenue in terms of actual projects finished, and we're expecting less capital expenditure. We know we have Cedar Hill seismic coming up, planning and design work, and shoreline seismic, but no announcements yet. We know that Vic High will be a large construction project, but its expenditures will sit in work in progress until completed. So that's why the bylaw amounts have gone down. And that's just a visual of the prelim to prelim again, second from right. And again, we can see this change in local capital at the bottom, where we're increasing the amount of capital transfer from operating to 1.3 million and reducing that local capital transfer altogether. So in conclusion, we're asking the board to pass a bylaw tonight of $253,606,307. And we know that we're trying to provide status quo and normalcy during COVID and work toward living within our means in 21-22. In terms of alignment, without a strategic plan yet, it's staff's recommendation and belief that this preliminary budget responds to consultation, speaks to the written submissions from stakeholders, aligns to student learning, promotes transparency, builds toward elimination of structural deficit, and will be amended as the strategic plan is approved and implemented. Thank you. And there are some supporting documents here, nothing you haven't seen before. Draft 4 is included, which I've explained in terms of some of the additions. And again, the assumptions that we've made, which I've explained in my presentation, and then the ministry template attached. And that concludes my presentation.
Wow, that was an excellent presentation, Kim. Thank you so much for putting that together and for all the work that you've done to bring us along with this in the midst of a pandemic, no less. I very much appreciate all of the information, and it is a lot of information, and I expect there's going to be a lot of questions and curiosities before we move the motion. So I want to open up the floor and also invite our partners to participate at this stage before we move the motion and get to that stage. Winona.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to draw the trustees' attention to that reduction of 12 FTE. That does mean closer to 15 teachers losing their jobs, their livelihoods in this time of COVID. That's directly in contrary to what the Premier said in relation to the loss of international students would not be reflected with the loss of teaching jobs. He's quoted several times in several news sources and spoke live to it at the beginning of May. I would implore the trustees to look for a way of maintaining those teacher FTEs. I think we can predict international students coming back. To have these teachers lose their jobs in this time is very traumatic for them, and they're very aware that they're close to, I mean, they've been made excess yet. Layoff notices don't go out till the end of the month, but you are talking about people's lives. And if there's any way to preserve this, I don't think this is a business as usual type decision. I implore you to consider how you could do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Winona. Are there any other comments, questions from our partners? Trustee Rob Painter.
Hi to Secretary Treasurer. I've been trying to get my head around draft 4 and I'd be a little more organized, but it hasn't been a long time looking at it. When I looked at the amended budget, and then first off, correct me if I'm wrong, but we need to take into consideration the 2% wage increase. So when we're looking at wages will be generally 2% higher across the board. Is that correct for this upcoming year?
Yep, give or take.
Okay, so when I looked at custodial, when I did the 2%, that took them up, and I'm looking, sorry, I don't have page numbers on here, but it suggested that we would be spending just on status quo, no changes, 5.9 million. We're actually looking at spending 5.75. So about 100 and I don't know if that's 150K less or ballpark-ish. And it really surprised me. Now, I don't know if there was a note a little later on that I didn't quite understand, and maybe you can speak to, but it struck me as odd that recognizing all the predictions that COVID phase 2 is going to be coming in the fall, that we would actually be looking at any kind of reductions to custodial expenditures. Thanks.
Okay. So I think the custodial, I'm just going to flip my screen here for a minute. The custodial change, the 2% is included in the 5.7 that we're going to spend on custodial. We spent about 5.7 or 5.8 in 1920. We know that during COVID, we had some additional staffing that was added. But in terms of the regular staffing, as we move into 2021, it's a status quo staffing, and we know we haven't reduced any staffing FTE at the custodial level. So it may be just a matter of the increased staffing that we had for this year versus what we're intending to spend next year.
Go ahead, Rob.
Sorry, just a follow-up then, because like when I'm looking at the 1920 wage numbers, and I'm looking at 2021 status quo, they're the same numbers. And so I don't quite understand. Are you saying that the 2% was already worked into the 1920 numbers?
No, I'm saying that as we move across the page to get to the 5.7 under 2021, right? So
yes,
we're saying we're going to spend 5.7 on custodians this year. So it is a bit less than last year, but what I'm saying is during 1920, we may have had more expenditures in custodial because of some of the pressures we felt around COVID or school startup or other types of expenditures that happened over the year. So it doesn't mean that throughout 2021, we won't be adding extra custodial during the summer, or if COVID continues that those numbers won't go up. But in terms of looking at custodial FTE in 1920 and looking at custodial FTE in 2021, there's been no reduction in the FTE and the correct wage unit has been applied. So this is the actual cost of the same amount of custodians as last year. It just doesn't include the some of the extra staffing we may have put in place.
Okay.
Similar to SBIL, we're starting off with a preliminary budget, and it will probably increase by the time we get to amended.
Trustee Ryan Painter.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. The first one was just around, and maybe I missed it when the Deputy Superintendent was going over the Equity of Opportunity Grant numbers, but there was a 68K unallotted, and I maybe I missed where it was going. I just wasn't quite sure. I did note it. I'm just wondering if you can refer me back to that, and where is that 68K going to be potentially allotted to? I just wasn't quite sure.
Deb, do you want to speak to that, or do you want me to?
Yes, so from the district team, we're not yet sure where it may go. I think a bit of that is around COVID and what we're able to support moving forward. At this point, it has not been allocated, but that's what we're looking at. And Kim, you may have other.
Yeah, I think one of the thoughts that came to mind for me was that because we hadn't completely decided how, who, or what these supports would be provided, what kind of employees would they be contracted. I think it leaves us a little bit of wiggle room for some of those unknowns. But what we can do is track it throughout the year and indicate to the board what remains unspent to make sure we're fully allocating once we know what the final spending plan looks like, when we've determined who and how the services will be provided and by what types of people.
Okay, one more follow-up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just around what Winona mentioned earlier, and my apologies if I'm late to the party or if I'm missing something. I'm just curious if you can go over a little bit more the reduction that you've pointed out, or that we have in the report of 12, and what she's saying with 15. I'm just not clear where the change is there. or maybe I've totally missed something.
So I think what, and we could ask Winona, but what I believe is that, so 12 full-time equivalent equates to 15 different people that may not all have a full-time equivalent job, I believe. So often there's more people than there are FTE. Do you know what I mean? So if we're 2 people and I have a 0.5 FTE and you have a full-time, we have 1.5 FTE, but it's 2 people. So I think that's what that references to.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Kim and team, because I know you've got a great team behind you for the very thorough presentation. I think it's great to see that we are presenting materials using some of those ministry templates, which I think is really useful, certainly from my perspective, in terms of understanding the depth and breadth of the budget that we're looking at. I'm really pleased to hear that we are committed to aligning with our strategic plan and that we are acknowledging that this is work that we will need to do throughout the year once we've got that final strat plan in place. And really appreciate the fact that, you know, those partner group submissions, you know, our fantastic partner groups have taken the time to put in writing their suggestions, their concerns around budgeting, and the fact that you so clearly laid out how it is that we are seeking to address some of those is greatly appreciated. I'm wondering, I have a question. I'm wondering, and this goes back again to that 12 FTE teacher, which we're saying is excess to needs. I'm wondering whether we've costed keeping those staff members or putting them to work elsewhere while we wait to see what actually happens with ISP. I know that unlike some provinces, we're in much better shape in terms of the COVID situation, and that may actually result in more students wanting or seeing our province as an attractive place to come and to learn. I'm wondering if you can provide some further details for the board around that.
Sure. So we know that teacher average salary in School District 61 is about 105,000. So if we were to maintain 12 FTE with no enrollment, it would be an additional cost of 1.26 million. For me, I caution the board if we're moving toward living within our means and we normally increase and decrease teacher staffing, education assistant staffing, clerical staffing by enrollment. This is in complete alignment with that.
Go ahead, Trustee Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to follow up. Have we had any direction, like ministry direction around this and about the status quo budget as it relates to FTE and per pupil, like headcount, like how many kids we think we need to serve this coming year?
The ministry direction is in the budget instructions that are given out each year. There's no mention of maintaining staffing in international in those budget instructions. And as you know, we're required to submit a balanced budget. And there's no mandate to say how or you must staff. Largely our funding is driven off enrollment, and then we are left to our devices to allocate the funding as the board sees fit in its annual budget process.
And then Chair, you'll just allow me one more follow-up. And so the numbers here that we're seeing, so the 12 FTE or 15 individuals affected, can you give us a bit of an idea of how that compares to previous years where we've seen enrollment fluctuate and had to offset that by reducing staff in certain areas?
I can't speak to that because I haven't been here for very long. I understand it's a fairly, because we've been growing, we have not been in this situation. COVID and the international student enrollment has been a significant change for the district. I'm not sure if anybody in HR or Colin would like to speak to it, but I think it's an unusual circumstance for the district. It does not happen each year that I know of.
I can confirm that Kim is correct that in the last 3 or 4 years, there have been 0 to 1 layoff of teaching staff. And at this point, we are uncertain of the number of layoffs that there will be in this year because the Human Resources Department is currently working through trying to match those access to needs teachers with positions which are available. But it would be accurate to say that that task is more challenging this year than it has been in recent previous years.
Trustee Whitaker? Nope. Trustee Ryan Painter? And then Trustee Leonard.
Actually, I think Trustee Rob Painter has his hand up first, so can I just defer to him because I've already spoken and then I can go later?
I think Trustee Rob Painter has spoken as well.
Oh, okay.
So let's go to Trustee
Yeah.
Leonard as she has not had the floor yet.
Okay, thank you. Just backing up, we usually have enough retirements to have covered teacher layoffs in the past eight or so years. So that's never usually been an issue. I'm wanting to go back to one of Kim's slides that was, I don't know, 5 or 6 near the end, I'm wanting to say, where you said that we were $8.3 million that we were moving forward, but the budget bylaw is 7.046. I was just wondering what the discrepancy was there. If what's in the budget package is different now that we've had the update, or yeah, what the discrepancy is there.
Sorry, can you mention that again?
Well, you had a couple of slides near the end, you had said that we were at 8.3 million that we were having to move when you got into the numbers down near the end. We were having to move $8.3 million to cover our deficit. It had gone down from 13 and was now at 8.3.
Right.
But in the budget bylaw, what we're moving out of surpluses and operating appropriated surpluses and unrestricted operating surpluses was 7.046. So I'm just wondering why it's not 8.3. I couldn't find 8.3 in the papers I have in front of me anywhere to balance out to what the budget bylaw was asking us for.
My slide may be incorrect.
Yeah, that's the one. But
yeah, no, I think the slide is incorrect. The budget bylaw template is correct. The ministry template.
That's good. That's good because it's less than the 8.3. So I'm happy about that. I just wanted to verify that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give the floor to Trustee McNally as she hasn't had an opportunity, and then we'll go to Trustee Ryan Painter and Trustee Rob Painter.
Thanks so much. Before I ask 2 questions, I would just like to say thank you to our Secretary Treasurer for her patience with my questions, which I clarified some things in email because of her answers. So thank you so very much for that and for a helpful presentation here. I would just like this is a detail, but it really matters to me and to the kids. So on the thought exchange slide, I think it was page 9 of the running total there. And again, on the talking tables slide on page 13 of the running total of pages, what can we do? There was an item called targeted supports for students with challenging behavior. And I'm wondering what those targeted supports are. And then I have one more question.
Yeah, I think that was, so one of the supports for children with challenging behavior for sure is going to come from that Equity of Opportunity grant with that $300,000 at K-3, in my opinion. In terms of supporting students that may not be identified or designated and self-regulation and learning some of those controls and things like that. But those bullets were pulled from the department presentation the other day. So I wonder if Deb or somebody else would like to speak to it, or Harold at all, in terms of what those supports for children with challenging behaviors might be.
I can speak to a little bit. Some of those would be looking at, when we're looking at the Equity of Opportunity Grant, we would be looking at some of Ross Green's work and professional learning opportunities for teaching staff. We'd also be looking at increasing our, we're not sure whether it would be a behavior support interventionist or a consultant or teacher counselor or learning support teacher, but one that can go in and support the younger years in classrooms and working with school-based teams. So some examples that we've been looking at and listening to with input from the thought exchange and our inclusion survey.
Thank you. So it could be professional development, or it could be staff, is what I'm understanding, or combination, I guess, of both. Thank you. Thank you for that. The other question I have is the 1.1 million added to the inclusion budget. And I'm wondering if that's part of the school-based inclusion, the SBIL. I always forget what that acronym stands for. Does that go to schools, the 1.1 million, and principals decide how to disperse that in the school?
The way that's come to me in terms of adding supports throughout the year since I arrived is generally a need identified by the principal, discussed with the school-based team, and then provided to the district learning team. And then a request comes to Deb and I to add a certain number of EA hours or increase teacher staffing to this school because of this pressure. Deb and I talk about it, and we talk to Katrina about, where are we at with the budget? Where's the staffing? And we make the call whether to add it or not. And largely, I don't think we've denied any, Deb, that have come through. So it's a team approach from the school to the district to approve the funding, and then the supports go into the school.
Thank you.
Trustee Ryan Painter.
Thank you. I suppose I'm going back to the 12 teacher positions, 15 in total, and wondering, certainly not presuming that every effort was not made, but I'm wondering if there are any scenarios that the Secretary Treasurer can tell us wherein that 1.2 or 1.3 million was found, and maybe, I'm just curious of what other spaces. I have a difficult time sitting with us living in uncertain circumstances and thinking that, we're going to be potentially, losing teachers, and then to hear at the same time from Colin, and I think I may have heard him right, that may not be all that we lose. So I'm certainly concerned about that, and I'm just wondering what other preliminary work was done to look at shifting numbers around.
Well, in terms of my work, there was no additional effort to find funding for that FTE, as if we were to lose 100 students out of a school or 400 students out of ISP, given our practice of how we allocate staffing based on enrollment, it was very clear to me that there were less students, therefore less teachers who are required. And in terms of it being greater than 12 FTE or 15 people that may be laid off, I don't think I heard that from Colin, but maybe he can clarify.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear in my explanation of where we are in the teacher staffing cycle. So schools have recognized teachers as being excess to needs at their individual schools, but due to retirements and resignations and just regular job postings that arise from year to year, we are looking for placements for those teachers that were made excess to needs. There were 30. That number's now down to 15 that have not been placed in other jobs. But because some of the teachers are specialty teachers, they might be secondary teachers who are teachers of mathematics or science, it wouldn't be natural for us just to place them in a job at an elementary school. So we are working with the union to look at what jobs might be available that have yet to be filled, that those teachers could be moved into. So there are enough positions available for the teachers that were made excess to needs. It's just a matter of whether they're actually a fit for that position based on their qualifications and experience and their areas of interest. And we will not know whether we've been successful in that process for probably another few days. And it's at the end of this month where the declaration of a layoff will be made if the Human Resources Department and we working alongside the GVTA are unable to place a teacher in a position for the coming school year.
Thanks, Colin. I was unclear. I appreciate that clarification.
And I can speak a little bit to the ISP. We have not lost any ISP staffing in a lot of years. Previous to 2007, we have a very robust program. COVID has made an incredibly unusual year. If Horgan comes through and is able to provide extra funding for our school districts, obviously that would be a helpful piece for us, but we haven't heard anything on that, even though he made that announcement. The budgeting for that has not come through. And Jeff is certainly in touch with all of our different countries that are thinking about it, and they're watching COVID just as carefully as we are. So if there's changes or improvements, we haven't necessarily lost that interest, but people are making judgment calls, and that will probably be delayed significantly as we head into the new year. So obviously, if our numbers go up, we'll be hiring those people back.
Trustee Rob Painter.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer, just going back to wages. Sorry, I've got two questions, but the first one is about wages, and just looking at maintenance and noting that there's a significant increase there, and I was wondering if you could just speak to what the planning and expectations are around the additional resources there.
Yeah, and so in the assumptions for draft 4, well, actually the assumptions for draft 3 is that we recover wages. We have a recovery account, and we recover wages for various reasons. So custodial for rentals, some clerical time from, I believe, another fund, a principal, vice principal from another fund, the provincial outreach. In draft 3, I had put all of the recoveries totaling about $400,000, all under maintenance, assuming it was all custodial, but that wasn't right. And so as we move into draft 4, there's a reclassification to move some of those recoveries around. And so where I had all the recoveries in maintenance, they didn't belong there.
Okay. And then completely switching tangents here, just to follow on Trustee Leonard's question about the actual amount of surplus that we're appropriating. I could not for life of me, I went back to look through the government numbers and I could never track it properly. How much do we actually have on hand in surplus right now? Like over and above what we're planning on allocating?
I think that is in that slide. Those were actuals. So here, if I share this, these were actuals in the operating grant throughout the years.
So we are at,
So like if we start at the top of the list in the financial statements for operating, for the first year, you had 14.3 surplus, 17.6. So at the end of 18-19, you had 15.5 in surplus.
so this is a running total, it's not cumulative, of course, but.
No, you have, you have what your financial statements indicate as your surplus. And then as you budget into the following year, you use up some of that surplus. So these are not cumulative. They shouldn't be adding together.
Okay.
They are stated in the financial statements.
Okay.
What I was trying to demonstrate here is whether we were looking for 13.4 or 8.3 in surplus. It was not out of line with the surpluses that we had had in the past. And that if we suspended spending in schools and departments for the remainder of the year, we should be safe to budget for this amount of surplus to be used, because it wasn't out of line with previous year's financial statement carry forwards.
Yeah, understood. So, and thank you for that. I appreciate that clarification. But if I look at 2018-19, 2019-20, what is our most current number there?
50.5 at the end of 18-19. That's our last audited financial statement.
So if we are planning on drawing down 7.046, that we will have a balance in surplus of the difference. That much again?
Depending on the spending pattern this year. So we don't have our audit done yet.
Right.
So we should know that by August or September 2020.
Okay, thanks very much for that clarification.
That projection, yeah.
Winona, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, seeing no more speakers. So we've got two parts of the motion to pass the budget tonight. The first recommended motion is that the board approve the appropriation of surplus to balance the 2020-2021 preliminary annual budget in the amount of $7,046,806 as follows. June 30th, 2020 projected unrestricted operating surplus of $4,327,010. June 30th, 2019 appropriated surplus approved September 2019, $2,037,796. June 30th, 2019 appropriated surplus approved April 2019, $682,000. So that would be our first motion. Thank you, Trustee Leonard. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Ferris. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so the motion carries. And then the next motion needs to be carried unanimously. Did you get the vote count for that, Kim?
I think so. I have Trustee Rob Painter opposed.
Yeah, and everybody else in favor. So the next motion needs to be carried unanimously. It's that the Board of Education agree to give all three readings of the 2020-2021 annual budget bylaw at the meeting of May 25th, 2020. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Trustee Leonard, Trustee Ferris. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. So the motion carries, but not unanimously. So what are our next steps, Secretary Treasurer?
I guess you could try to pass some readings of the bylaw, or you would carry on to the next agenda item.
Chair, if I may, the last time that I was a butt like this, first two readings were passed at the time, and a third reading was passed at a separate meeting or by other means.
Yep. Okay. So how much of the motion do I read? Just the whole thing, skipping the third time?
Yeah, I guess so.
If I might, I believe that the first and second have passed, but because it wasn't unanimous, the third will have to be at a subsequent meeting. That's been our practice before.
But we do need to vote on it, right? Like I have to read the recommended motion is that the board.
Well, it's already, first and second have already been passed because it was a majority of the board. But the third one will have to be at a subsequent meeting because it wasn't unanimous. That's been our practice.
So you're saying I don't need to read anything more?
No.
I would prefer if you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's that the Board of Education, it doesn't say pass but I would assume that would be it. The 2020-2021 annual budget bylaw in the amount of $253,606,307.
And then you would be read a first time.
Read a first time the 25th day of May 2020, read a second time the 25th day of May 2020. And leave it there. So can I have a mover and a seconder for those pieces, please? Thank you, Trustee Whitaker, Trustee Leonard. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? All those opposed? And the motion carries.
Can we just ask when the third reading will occur? Is it a poll vote or is it at the next board meeting?
Secretary Treasurer?
It's at the board's will, the assembly's will. Bylaw should be read at a meeting, public meeting.
So it'll be our June meeting. Trustee Whitaker?
I was just going to say I would like to see it at the June meeting.
Okay. Thank you again to you and your team for all the work you've put into this. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We'll move to item C under your report, Kim, the Francophone Games.
This is to advise the board that the Francophone 2020 Games scheduled for Oak Bay and some use of Willows has been postponed to 2021.
Any questions or comments? Okay, then can we move to the next item?
Sure. So on page 40 of the pack-up is a briefing note or a report to the board to ask the board if they want to consider a process for school closure, following up on the seismic identification mitigation projects at both Craigflower and Shoreline, and the fact that to do them separately, we would require two separate capital plans along with some reporting, and following up with the boundary review where it was expected to or was intended to grow Shoreline and add French Immersion, I believe, or expand it and add space, etc. While creating a K-8 and not really closing Craigflower and moving the students very far away, this option in the capital planning process does involve closing Craig Flower and moving to Shoreline, if that's the most efficient capital projects that we want to take on. And in the analysis, that is the most cost-effective measure. And so what we are trying to do as a staff is to decide what we're going to put into our capital plan. And given the analysis done so far and the boundary review, the option that is being presented as the most economical is to combine Craig Flower and Shoreline at Shoreline as a K-8, to add an NLC and to add some space to that school. But in order to do that, this invokes the board's policy on school closure. And so what we're seeking tonight is not a decision from the board on school closure, but whether it wants to consider it. And if it does want to consider it in order to advance this capital project at Shoreline and Craig Flower, do you want to start your public consultation process in order to hear back from parents, staff, community around gathering the information you need to make the decision on a school closure? So it's by no means saying it's a recommended option. It's one option in the project description report. And what we're asking tonight is if it is in the board's will or the board's desire to move forward with this particular option and consult the community on a closure and make its decision later after it gathers all the information.
Trustee Ferris.
Well, I'd just like to maybe think out loud a little bit here, so don't take me too seriously, but I have some issues with calling this a school closure when in fact we're not closing a school. We're talking about moving a school to an adjacent property. We're not actually talking about closing a school. Now, I don't question that we would need to go through a process, much like a school closure process, in order to do this, to find out what the community thinks and wants and so forth. But I just throw that out at you. Thank you very much.
I can respond by saying I sought legal advice from BCSTA as well as the Ministry Capital Branch. And given that you would not be operating a school on the current location and that the children would be attending at a different site, that it does meet the criteria for school closure if it were to go forward, and that the ministry would be looking for us to have gone through a school closure process.
Well, I certainly don't argue that we have to go through the process. Thank you.
Trustee Duncan, then Trustee Whitaker.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. I'm wondering if I could just get some clarity around the proposed capacity. So are we saying that we would increase the capacity for the middle school cohort to 700? Or is it a combined K-8, so kindergarten and middle, capacity of 700 that we're proposing here?
It's a combined K-8 capacity.
Of 700, okay.
And the school, to be honest, the school has just about enough capacity to attend to that now, but what it doesn't have is all the infrastructure and ancillary spaces like libraries, washrooms, and gyms to bring it up to that standard.
Okay, and so Chair, if I may just continue on with my questions, is that all right? Yeah, I've got a few more.
Yes, please.
Thanks. So building on that then, when we were undertaking the boundary review, one of the things that I learned from that process was that we have maximum numbers, student numbers at elementary and middle and secondary that we consider optimal, so that we wouldn't want to go above. And the other thing certainly that came across very clearly is our district's commitment to the middle school model. And so I'm wondering kind of what's being envisioned here, and to what extent that deviates from that middle school model commitment that we have as a district, and also to what extent we're talking about a facility that would be above the maximum number of students that we would consider ideal at both the elementary and the middle school level.
I think Superintendent is interested in that one.
So I can speak to a couple of components here. One of them is we have always considered this as sort of two separate buildings coming together on the same piece of land. The nations are very interested in this and providing a community hub as a center component. Now, the original idea of what they had in mind of the building will have to be considered as we go through a consultation process. But having both the elementary staying an intact elementary cohort and middle school with all the amenities that we have with other middle schools, and then a hub that the nations are very interested in being a part of. We also would be looking at the K through 8 French Immersion. And as you'll recall, as we went through our boundary review, the over prescription of French Immersion and the push at Marigold and not enough spaces. And this would alleviate some of the spaces on that side of the city to be able to carry that through. And in that consultation, we've also talked to our nations about having an early adopting of Indigenous language as well as an offering in that building. So all things considered, if they, in a perfect world, it would keep to the alignment of the school size, except that we're going to have two buildings on the same piece of property.
Okay, who's next on the speakers list? Yeah, Trustee Whitaker.
Thank you. I think that Trustee Duncan has touched on some of my questions, but I guess what I'm looking for is I know that we have done this, but I would like some refresher on where we have had consultation with the shoreline community and the Craig Fowler community that even, that they're even interested in this idea of merging these two schools. And I would also just want to make the comment that I too, in the motion, don't like the word closure that's used and would love to change it to move. Because I just know that when we put that word out in that way out into the community, that it creates a lot of anxiety. But maybe if we could get some follow-up on the consultation that's already occurred. I mean, I know that the nations are interested in the hub, but that's not that they're interested in K-8 as a structure for the system. That I guess I'm looking for some reassurance that this is a direction that the community itself wants to continue to discuss.
So I can speak to a little bit to that, having been a part of some of the history. And remember, the players have changed. We've been at this for quite a long time. And so this motion helps us re-energize the consultation process as bodies have changed. But throughout the last over 2 years, both with both nations and with both schools, we've had fairly deep kind of chunks of consultation time. Schools are very interested in obviously upgrading both buildings to much nicer learning scenarios than what they currently have. They like the idea both communities come together and both nations like that. And what they like about it the most is it brings families together, especially as they see K-8 having all the opportunities, but embracing that component that families and students are aligned together in a very close space, and then having some of the cultural things embedded in that. Now, having said that, I know that even in the last year, there's been a number of people that have changed over. Colin has touched on it several times, and I know that Shelley has too, but it needs a much more robust beginning space again, and this would give us the opportunity to enter back into that and have a more fulsome conversation.
Thank you. Can I just get one follow-up on that? I guess maybe my follow-up is on the public consultation. Do we have any thoughts or ideas what that's going to look like through COVID, noting that obviously we've created a type of consultation which is definitely in person and a lot of people in one room mingling about against poster boards and whatnot. So do we have thoughts on how we can effectively do this in a different way where there isn't that physical contact? I'm just concerned about us being able to do that.
So Colin can talk a little bit more to some of the particulars. We've certainly talked about putting some online components together. Not so hard for the school community, but difficult for our nations. Shelley's had lots more contact with both nations in a person-to-person piece. They're comfortable with us coming to them in lots of different capacities. So I think we'd almost have a hybrid of both. Shelley's nodding.
Colin, did you have something to add?
Yes, if I may. Thank you. I just wanted to go back to, it's probably not hugely important in the greater context of the conversation, but wanted to go back to the boundary review and before then the French Advisory Committee. The recognition of the fact that there was an imbalance in terms of the number of seats available for French Immersion on the west side of the town compared to the east, and that there was that consideration of opening another venue on the west side of town. And in the boundary review, that certainly came through as a theme when we heard back from the community. But in the boundary review itself, there was no recognition or proposal put forward that Craigflower be that site. We were looking at the catchment areas and capacities of the schools on the west side of town and didn't move forward with a proposal around any individual school becoming dual track because there wasn't room or capacity at any one of those individual schools. And I think it was only in the summer, only in the July of 2019, when the Ministry of Education voiced an acceptance or an openness to the idea of that combined site for Shoreline and Craigflower. Were we able to go back to that idea, I think, from years previous, that Craigflower might be under consideration. But in terms of the boundary review itself, no, that was never on the table for us because of the capacities of the schools. And in terms of consultation, the Esquimalt Nation has voiced some willingness to meet face-to-face with me. And so we're hoping that we would be able to do that in this school year if the board decides that they'd like to pursue the joint site as an option. And I know through Shelley and Craig and the Indigenous Education Department, there have been regular meetings with the Songhees Nation, and we will be picking up with the drafting of the local education agreement with them later this week. So certainly not difficult to connect with the nations in a meaningful way. And in terms of communication with the school, I think because of the Zoom platforms that are available to us, consultation at the school level will be relatively straightforward. Yeah, we do appreciate that we'll have to have a fairly unusual plan or a different plan in terms of trying to engage the wider community in this process.
Shelley, did you want to add something? Shelley Nimi, and then I'll go to Trustee Leonard, then Trustee Duncan, and then I'll put myself on the list.
Thank you, Trustee Whitaker. I want to acknowledge kind of the question because I think it's a really important one in regards to consultation, especially as we approach Craigflower and Shoreline regarding the complexity of it. And so I think we need to, be very open and aware of what that's going to look like. But I do want to support what our superintendent and our associate is saying. I think that, there's multiple methods and entrance points in, and because of the way that we've been able to collectively work, I think as a district, through this COVID response, there's been actually an opportunity to bring both nations together in a way that has developed, I think, even a stronger opportunity for connection and consultation. And I definitely know that this conversation around what this could look like as an opportunity is definitely on their radar, because they're both wanting to continue to pursue their local education agreements right now. And so because they have, one nation has a local education agreement with us and one is going to enter into that with us, this is going to be an item for them, because the majority of their children attend those schools. And so they're really going to want to look at what is the best interest for their children and what does that mean in regards to changing the results where they're currently at. Right. And so we know that right now we're not necessarily fulfilling a good service for them in that return. So it is going to be a priority, and they're going to want to come to the table in multiple ways to be able to examine this. So I think, with the willingness for them to want to meet with, with the district face to face to start to have this conversation, and then us to be very fully open and aware of what that looks like. I think we're in a really good position, and we have an excellent opportunity with the relationship with them. But I also want to acknowledge you for tabling the question, because I think it's a really important one. We need to be very cautious about when we step forward into it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've got Trustee Leonard, Trustee Duncan, myself, and then Trustee McNally.
Thanks. I've got a number of questions.
And then Trustee
we had talked at Shoreline in past meetings of a neighborhood learning center and some kind of a health facility with nursing on site, mental health people on site. And I have many questions, so this is just the first one. Are those things still envisioned to be on a site with a combined school with 700 students?
That is in the concept in the PDR for the combined K-8 or for the Shoreline project. So the NLC to include a cultural space, childcare, and some sort of health. That's what's envisioned now. We know those things can change by the time you get to construction, but that's in the PDR right now.
Okay, thanks. And when we're talking about possibly opening it up to early French immersion with 5 or 6 grades, we're looking at another 120 students to add to the mix. If you're doing early French immersion for grades 1 through 5, correct? Mr. Roberts, maybe?
Yes.
Yes, that would be correct.
So according to my little calculations here with what Shoreline has now, what Craig Flower has now, and that you're already at 700 capacity. So that's my first sort of point. When I looked at the maps, with the boundary review maps, View Royal Elementary catchment is really close. Elementary catchment is really close to Shoreline. Would you turn away students who then want to go to an elementary school that's right there because their catchment is View Royal? Would we have to then look at readjusting the catchments of View Royal to maybe take some of the pressure off of Eagle View, for instance, down the road? Or I was just looking at that because the people, like I say, the View Royal catchment is very close to the Shoreline school.
Based on the projections that we currently have, we believe that it would be possible for the View Royal students who wanted to enter into French immersion at Shoreline to continue to stream into there. Projections for Shoreline are about 425 as they currently stand. And as you correctly identified, if Craig Flower were to become a French immersion school and draw an early French immersion population of 125 students, with its current projections of around 125 to 130, that would certainly take the school very close to its capacity, but not to over. So it certainly would be prudent of us to get updated projections based on this year's numbers in our buildings, which we'll get in the fall, in October. And certainly not inconceivable that it would be a good idea to adjust some of those boundaries, but we do think that the students in that neighborhood all could be accommodated within their catchment schools.
Okay, thank you. And my last question would be, when you're talking about a timeline for consultation, what is the timeline and when do you expect to say that consultation is over?
I don't think we've, in my opinion, I don't think we've put together a consultation plan. What we're seeking tonight is, does the board want to carry forward with this? And if so, we will formulate a consultation timeline and plan and bring it back for your approval.
Thank you.
Trustee Duncan?
Thank you, Chair. Trustee Leonard touched on some of my questions, but there's a couple of more around the land. So I'm trying to understand the site map that's in the packet on page 42. Unclear what exactly happens to Craigflower then. So obviously we would be closing that site, and the idea would be to have a K-8 cohort that straddles the entire property. So combining, if we were to sort of think about it as like combining Craigflower and Shoreline, are there any common boundaries? Because I thought there was a heritage building kind of in between. I'm trying to imagine, you know, the effect on the land of what we're proposing.
So the picture on page 4, the diagram on page 42 of the packet, I believe the yellow is the construction area, the green remains, and the red outline is the seismic mitigation and added space to the building to create a K-8. And that there are various ways to zone or timetable a building where it's essentially 2 schools, 1 campus. But the red is the proposed addition to the site to make a K-8 building. And
Okay.
that's a conceptual drawing. It's one possibility.
Okay. And then what happens to the land that Craigflower currently sits on?
That would be a separate consultation if the board wanted to dispose of it.
Okay, so that land and building, there's no plans for it at the moment in terms of this current iteration. Okay.
No.
Okay, and then the other question that I had was around the nature of what's being recommended that we consult on. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to kind of open up the consultation a little wider to allow for some feedback through that process on some of the other options here, and not just confine ourselves to the one option, and what your thoughts are on that.
Definitely during a school closure process, you are presenting multiple options so that the public and the parents and the students and the staff understand why the board is contemplating such a decision. And so I think all of the options in the PDR would be explained to the public in order for them to understand why the board may be considering a school closure in order to move the school to Shoreline Middle School.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks, Kim.
And really that's what you're trying to do, is avail yourself of all the information and for somebody to bring up a better idea. Maybe we don't have all the exactly right ideas. So it's an opportunity for you to ask the community what it thinks is a solution.
Okay, well, I want to put myself on the list. This is a project that I've been like wildly excited about for many, many, many years. So I'm excited that we're getting to the point of really moving forward to it. And I'm very encouraged to hear that this is moving up the priority list with the ministry, because boy, both of these schools are way, way overdue for renewal. And I think we have a huge opportunity here to do something really, really great in partnership with the nation, so the betterment of for all of the families, and to really add to what's happening on the west side. I too, though, have concerns about calling this a closure, and we're gonna have to be very, very careful in how we communicate it, because the inside baseball might be that we need to do a closure consultation process. But, what we're actually doing is consulting on a relocation of the school. And so I'm wondering if it would be possible to consider calling it that. Like even if we just amended or moved the motion with the amendment, to commence public consultation to consider the closure and relocation of, or something like that. Secretary Treasurer?
Yeah, so as I've been listening to the discussion, I wonder if the recommendation on page 43 could read that the Board of Education of School District 61 invoke policy 3711, principles, criteria, and public consultation process for school closure, to commence public consultation to consider the closure of Craig Flower Elementary School in order to move it to Shoreline Middle School.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that is a lot more clear because that is what we're talking about. And then, of course, the next motion is to develop that public consultation plan, which will be answering a lot of the questions I think we have and making sure that we're, both how do we do this in the current, situation, and how important it is to make sure that we are doing it in a good way, to, build a school that's really going to serve, not just families, but also I think it's an opportunity to really advance reconciliation in a real sort of like active way. I don't know, how many of you have been inside Craig Flower recently, but wow, like this is a huge opportunity. And so I'm excited to move forward with it. And I'm wondering if anybody, well, I've got two others on the list. And then maybe we can look at moving a motion with the suggested amendment. So I've got Trustee McNally, and I'm at the point where I'm pointing at my screen. You can tell it's 10:15. Okay, Trustee McNally and then Trustee Painter, and then I'd like us to move a motion and so we can get to the end of our agenda before it's too late. Thank you, Trustee McNally. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. As we don't have an amendment officially on the floor, I too took Trustee Whitaker's point about not having this motion just be a bald-faced closure of a school. I think having it recorded that way would create consternation in the wider community. So I'm on board with having an amendment because we don't have one on the floor. My suggestion was going to be to add as part of a plan to offer K-8 at Shoreline, but whatever the board decides. I mean, I'm not putting that, usually if I'm going to make an amendment, I say motion to amend, but our Secretary Treasurer already has a suggestion. So I guess, it's whatever everybody likes. I'm just glad to see some follow-up on Trustee Whitaker's concern with just leaving it at closure.
Trustee Painter?
Sure. I don't think I have too much new to offer, but I'll say it for the sake of saying it. Really like Trustee Duncan's comment about the range of options. I myself am really interested in this, in what the different options are and what the trade-offs are, certainly as far as amenities are concerned, what the footprint would be like, what that would do to the overall lay of the land, what the different costs are. So something more along the lines of the Vic High consultation where we looked at different options, I think would be really appropriate about in that regard. The nature of the consultation process, COVID throws a wrench in everything. I get real concerns about making sure that this is sincerely a public consultation process and that people feel like they have easy access to get in and put their comments down, however that's going to be. So I know that we can rely on technology for a certain amount of that, but we're going to have to figure out something else for me to really feel comfortable that we've engaged publicly. And then the last point, I recall when there were conversations about early French immersion at Craig Flower, and I can certainly see from a planning perspective, it's an easy fit when you've got empty space and you can see how you could put in, 2 streams of classes from K to 5 easily and all that sort of thing. I understand that it's tidy, but I also think that in as much as it has really met the needs and desires of certain portions of our community with respect to George J. I think it's also brought with it a lot of other considerations, challenges, simply because of the compression of space that particular community needs. And I'm not suggesting for a second that Craig Flower is equivalent to George J or something else, but I think there are lessons that we can learn from there. So I really think that when it comes to expanding French immersion, and something I definitely support, I would really encourage us to start looking at more about converting populations than
Trustee Painter, I'm going to
filling
stop
empty
you because I
space.
feel like this is a little off the motion.
All right, well, that's actually the end of it, so I'm done.
Winona, would you like to speak before we see if we have a motion?
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, as the board considers this move forward, I would suggest that you have a look at John Stubbs as a model. I taught both kindergarten and grade 6 there. It's set up really nicely as that combination of elementary and middle school in a way that's very supportive for the younger and older grades. And if you're thinking about moving forward, I think there's a school not very far away that has been done well, and it's a good demonstration of how it can really work. Yeah, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. So would anybody like to move the motion? Thank you, Trustee Whitaker, Trustee Painter, Ryan Painter. So the motion is going to be with that that second piece, which is to relocate the school to the Shoreline. Secretary Treasurer, do you mind reading that? Just so we know what we're moving on.
Yep. That the Board of Education of School District 61 invoke policy 3711, principles, criteria, and public consultation process for school closure, to commence public consultation to consider the closure of Craig Flower Elementary School in order to relocate the school to Shoreline Middle School. And further, that the board directs staff to provide a public consultation plan for the board's approval.
Okay, when we get that public consultation plan, that'll be the time for us to provide our feedback on that. So is there any speakers to this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? And the motion carries. So for our next item is question period. We got a question. Essentially what the person is querying is around, they say the ministry recommended secondary students dedicate 3 hours of class a week or slightly more. Many of us know that some teachers have not decreased their required content since COVID. And so they're concerned that some students are being assigned significantly more hours, like 10 to 15 hours a week. And they're querying how can schools make sure equity is occurring across schools and subjects and teachers, so that some students are not being penalized based on the class or the teacher that they have.
So Colin can speak a little bit more to this. Colin meets with the secondary principals on a regular basis. We did put out the outlines of what staff were supposed to be delivering to students. And hopefully, if that delivery has not been what families or students have expected, they can certainly see the principal or vice principal and reach out to them in order to talk about the depth of material that they are covering if they're feeling like it's overwhelming. And certainly as the principals and vice principals have met with Colin, they've reviewed how things are going and the supports students can have and concerns that might be put forward. So there's lots of venues if people are feeling like there's a scenario that's not working out for them, I would advise people to reach out to the principal and share their concerns so they can follow up with the teacher.
Excellent. So that was the other part of the question, is what are parents' avenue to deal with this for the last month? So that's a really clear message that if you do have concerns about the workload, that you need to reach out to the teacher and the principal and have those conversations. And then the other part of the question is, what's the plan for this in the fall if we are back online again?
So we will be awaiting the Ministry of Health's direction, of course, to see what we're doing. I know that they are truly hoping that we can manage COVID through the summertime, and they're aiming for 100%. Right now, what the process of moving into stage 3 is very much about seeing how it worked from stage 4 to stage 3, taking our very best feedback back from things that have worked incredibly well and other things that have been not so great, online platforms that have been successful and ones that felt that we missed some of the mark, pulling all that information together and truly make some of the best plans we can as we move into the fall. So with all the partner groups having said over and over again, we've certainly put in our all users letter every single time we put out there that collecting information right now is going to be critically important to do. To see, ultimately, we're navigating territory we haven't been in before. We want to do some planning and prep. And certainly the feedback loop is going to be good. So if parents also are getting some strong ideas about things that have worked well for their students, we put in the letter out to parents last week that they could let us know through the community inbox. It was attached to the letter to actually just link onto, and that feedback is going to be important as we move forward.
Okay, thank you so much. So then we're moving to item G, which is going to be a new standing item on our agendas, which is our section 72 reports, they're called, which is a record of our in-camera meetings. And I'm hopeful that that's a positive move for increased transparency. So then we move to new business, and I can turn it over to Trustee McNally to move for motion on student assessments.
Chair, before we move the motion, because I can't speak after, would you mind?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't mind at all, actually.
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm grateful by the response to our letter that you've brought this to the board for debate. Although we've had overwhelming support on this issue from our school reps, this issue certainly isn't just limited to Victoria teachers. Since the onset of remote learning, there's been considerable writing on the subject called "For a Halt to Traditional Letter Grade Assessment." For example, Maclean's, Global News, the New York Times, and a multitude of other pieces by educational experts in print and on the internet. With the provincial committee set to meet to discuss assessment and reporting, having a statement from you, Victoria's trustees, would be incredibly helpful to put fairness and equity in the center of pandemic assessment. Giving grades now will be based on faulty evidence, be highly dependent on family resources or lack of resources, and will inequitably reward those with more resources and punish those with less. Universities have acknowledged the impossibility of traditional grading during remote learning and have implemented a pass-fail system. I feel we should do the same. We know that stress hampers cognition. Many families are living with the stress of changing economic circumstances and the psychological implications of living through a pandemic. Some families have the skills and time to support their children to engage meaningfully with remote learning opportunities, but many do not. It is cruel to allow children already advantaged by their living circumstances the additional advantage of moving ahead of their peers by improving their final grade standing. Standing granted is already an option for BC for students to move on to the next level when they have had their studies interrupted due to circumstances beyond their control, such as serious illness. Pass-fail is another option that could avoid unduly penalizing students unable to fully engage in their learning in a remote context. I know it's late, but I'm hoping that you have the time to spend a little bit at least a little bit of time discussing this and thinking about the consequences. And really, I'm just hoping that you can weigh into the debate about how crazy it is for teachers to prepare report cards with regular grading system. Really next week is when report cards start to be prepared. And so I am hoping that you'll support this motion that Diane McNally's bringing, Trustee McNally. Thank you.
Thank you, Winona, and thank you for raising your hand there. It's kind of an awkward process we have here, especially on Zoom. So thank you for that. And I'll turn the floor to Diane. Trustee McNally.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks to Winona for really a great rationale for this motion. I don't have a lot. In fact, I have nothing to add. Winona said it really well. So I do hope, colleagues, that you'll take the considerations expressed into account and support this motion. It's, well, I'll just add that from what I've seen on social media, the engagement of students with online learning or any assignments sent to them as being kind of random and just, yeah, really difficult to come up with some standard way of giving grade marks. So I'll stop there before I garble what Winona said, because I think that was a really good rationale for the motion.
Do you have a seconder before we move forward? Thank you, Trustee Painter. Okay, speakers to the motion.
Sorry, which Painter?
Rob Painter. Sorry, Kim.
That's okay.
My chairing definitely deteriorates after 10:30. Speakers to the motion, please. Trustee Rob Painter.
As a middle-aged white guy, I've gotten used to acknowledging my privilege, but this is yet one more case where we are in a situation of privilege. I'm able to work at home. And so, you know, got two kids who are pretty motivated at the best of times, and they have a teacher and a trustee at home to help them. And so they've been doing really well. I've managed to relearn grade 11 pre-calculus, which is not my favorite, but we're getting through it. And it really speaks to what Winona's mentioned about how when the resources are there, and I'm not putting myself as a shining example, but we have the time and the ability to actually engage, and you know, pushing one of them a little harder to actually get him to do better work than he probably would turn in at the best of times in class under his own motivation. And so they're doing really well. And I know that that's not the standard case. I know that there's, you know, widely varying levels of capability and capacity. And so at one level, I want to say, oh, but I want to acknowledge my kids' effort. They know how hard they've worked. I think this is a great idea. And I do recognize that it needs to be done at a ministry level. And I really hope that this is a catalyst towards making that a reality. Thank you.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, hi folks. I know it's late, so I will be brief. I just wanted to put on the record my support for the motion and my appreciation to President Waldron for so eloquently and clearly putting across the case. I think we have an opportunity here to advocate for something that just makes a lot of sense, really for all students, but from through an equity lens, it certainly makes a lot of sense. You know, when I first considered the GVTA letter, I thought of graduates, and I thought, well, you know, it's one thing for other kids in other grade levels to have a pass or fail. What about our grads? But I think that, you know, as President Waldron pointed out, universities and colleges are getting their heads around this and adapting. And I think there's an opportunity for us to yeah, do something positive and advocate. So I am in support of the motion. Thanks.
Trustee Ryan Painter.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the motion being brought forward by Trustee McNally, and I appreciate the advocacy as well from President Winona Waldron. I'm not sure how I'm going to vote on this one, to be completely honest. I'm still thinking and processing. I've been reading up on the universities that are moving to the pass-fail system. Some universities are maintaining letter grades. Some universities are adopting for a student choice. How would you like us to admit you? And I'll note that a student union vice president at the University of Manitoba has actually cited that students are coming to her saying they're concerned whether or not a pass on their transcript is going to be seen positively by any professional schools or graduate schools as they go forward. So I think it's not necessarily as done and dusted as we like to think it might be. So I certainly have concerns around just saying, yeah, let's just go pass fail. Yeah, I think it raises some concerns for me, especially as it could detrimentally impact students who apply for graduate school or some kind of professional school into the future. So yeah, I don't know how I'm going to vote. I'm still waiting to hear what people might think. So yeah, we'll see.
Trustee Whitaker.
Thank you. And I'm really appreciating all of the comments being brought forward on this, and I appreciate President Waldron's bringing forward her union's perspective on this. I too have a lot of challenges with this. I get the whole idea of the pass and the fail, and how writing report cards right now when we don't necessarily have enough information on what they've really been doing in the last 6 weeks. And how does that really make it applicable on the grades that we're doing? But again, I am concerned, like this is easy to do in the elementary school level. It's another thing to have this conversation at the high school level, where we've got students that want to go abroad with their report cards. This is not just about BC. I know that there is some discussion that some universities are doing this, but again, that's not every university, and it's not universal. And again, what is a pass or fail? When you're looking at getting scholarships, etc., and you have put the work in, you do need the grade to get that scholarship to put you above somebody else. And further, this isn't in our mandate. This is clearly a ministry thing. So I can't support this motion the way it has been written. If somebody were to want to see this amended to advocate to the Ministry of Education to look at assessment going forward, I think that we are going to be in the same situation next September as we go through. So maybe this is an opportunity for us to get ahead of that and say, you know what, we really want to have a different way to look at assessment during these times, so that it is fair. I know that my daughter has worked really hard over the last months, and you know what, she really wants her grades that she had going into spring break, because they were really great. So she wants that to continue forward and to keep that honor roll status. And I don't want to take that away from those that are succeeding. So for me, this really is about, you know what, again, we've got 3 weeks left. I want to see us advocating for something that it's actually going to go somewhere and it's going to have effect. I don't think a letter right now is going to do much than get caught and be responded to sometime in August. So unfortunately, the way it's written, I can't support it.
Trustee Painter, you've already spoken to the motion.
No,
Do you want to add something very short?
No, I actually have a motion I'd like to bring, if I may.
Great.
I'd like to move a motion to refer this to the Advocacy Committee.
Do you have a seconder? Okay, any debate on the motion to refer this to the Advocacy Committee? Which I feel like it is well suited to hash this out. Trustee.
Can I just ask who seconded?
Trustee Whitaker.
Thank you.
Trustee Whitaker, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I like the idea, thus I've seconded, because I really do think that there is something here. I think that assessment, since we have changed curriculum, as we keep tweaking and working with this, we know that assessment has always been an issue. I think that there is a lot that we can do with assessment and report cards, but I would like us to be advocating in a way that we're ahead of the curve. we're really doing something to support our teachers in this. Yes, it would be nice right now for them to have a simple solution, but I don't think it's doable.
Chair, may I speak on it since I moved it?
Sorry. It's late.
Sure. Do you want to open?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I'll just what Trustee Whitaker said.
Trustee Rob Painter, he keeps trying to, and we keep
what
cut
exactly?
Off, so I apologize.
That's okay. What Trustee Whitaker said is exactly what I was going to say. She's totally stole my words, so it's good.
Trustee Rob Painter.
My concern with moving this to the advocacy committee, seeing as how we don't have any ad hoc committees meeting right now, is basically you're saying it won't happen. You're putting this in the round container and a round file. What's the term? Anyway, I really think that we need to think hard about the equity side of this. We're all in a privileged position.
Motion to refer?
I am. I'm very concerned that we're overlooking the concerns or the challenges that a significant portion of our student population is facing right now, and that by
I think
okay, I'll just leave it at that. I'm sorry.
So I understand the concern is when or will the advocacy committee meet? I would assume if we task them with work, they're going to meet right away. It's a small, nimble committee. Trustee Duncan?
I think it's great that we've been described as a nimble and small committee. Nimble, definitely.
Small and mighty.
But big and yeah, exactly. Okay, it's certainly our next advocacy committee meeting was supposed to be, I think, the 1st of June, which has been canceled. So I'm assuming we could reschedule that if we had urgent matters to address. I would not support the motion to refer unless I knew that we could properly and quickly address this. Otherwise, I agree with Trustee Painter, Rob Painter. It'll just get lost in the mix, and I don't think any of us want that. So I suppose if we could get some clarity that the committee can
Would you like to add an amendment to the amendment? Or maybe we can do a friendly or whatever, but can we just put a date on it that?
Yeah, that's a great.
To the advocacy committee to review as a matter of priority. I mean, you are the advocacy committee, Trustee Whitaker and Trustee Duncan, right?
Yeah, we are. Well, we're certainly the trustees in the committee. We've got obviously a wider committee, but certainly I think that putting a date on it would be great. We could reconvene on June 1st, presumably, a schedule is allowing. We've got an amendment on the floor. So do we need to vote on that amendment and then add a date, or can I add a further amendment?
You can go too deep. You can amend an amendment.
Okay, so I would move an amendment to the amendment to add a date where with the advocacy committee would meet next week to discuss it. We were supposed to meet next week anyways, but it's been removed from the calendar.
Is that doable to say next week? Superintendent? Yes, thumbs up. Okay. And also, is it really a board meeting at 10:42 if you're not adding amendments to the amendment? Okay, so do I have a seconder for the amendment? Thank you, Trustee Whitaker. So can we vote on the amendment to the amendment, which is to add the time? All those in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions? Trustee McNally and Trustee Leonard are abstaining. So the motion carries. So we're back to the amendment, the main amendment, I suppose. Which it isn't really an amendment. It's a motion to refer. Yes. Are you going to be able to manage that, Kim?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Are there any more speakers to the motion to refer? Trustee McNally.
Thank you. Regardless of the nimble aspect of the advocacy committee, I think that a referral is really going to kill this motion in terms of any practical action. The ministry moves pretty slowly, I'm sure. And, you know, I'm not even sure a push from our advocacy letter would create a change in time. So I think it's urgent that we send the letter as that's proposed tonight. So I'm speaking against referral.
Okay. Do we have any other speakers? I apologize. No. Okay. All those in favor of referring the motion to the advocacy committee to meet next week? All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? So that carries. Are there any notices of motion? May we have a motion to adjourn? Thank you. And thank you all for a good long meeting.
Well done, Chair.
Great job, Jordan. Great job.
Good thing I got my blue blocker glasses. That'll help. And we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.